Hi guys, so welcome back to another Gossip Girl video. I hope you're as excited as me. As part of a continuation of this series, we've got to talk about Serena Van Der Woodsen, and it made me think about the character and all the inherent flaws in her character that we've only seen really now as time's passed, especially now that terms such as pick me have become very popularized and often misused. But today I want to talk about how Serena Van Der Woodsen was really underutilized and ultimately a very tragic character that is hated on without people actually really thinking about how sad her whole story is. I'm really disappointed in the ultimate trajectory and downfall of this character. So I want to look at pick-me psychology, her terrible love interests and relationships with men, her abandonment wounds, and her really bad regression as a character. I really quite liked Serena in Gossip Girl in season 1. She doesn't really have much depth, but it does work for the character of Serena, who has this slightly ditzy, like bubbly personality. And since, as we've seen, Blake Lively talks a lot, is chatty, is quite loud. She has that energy to her. It really worked for this character in Gossip Girl. And the thing about Serena in season 1 is that she is so alluring, so charismatic, and also so mysterious because she's carrying this huge secret. I was so disappointed then when I got to season 5 and season 6, and I was like, what happened? Like, her storylines were so good in season 1, so interesting. There was a very clear plan from start to finish, and from that point it was never the same. It was just downhill from there. I mean, we have a clear setup in season 1, which is that she's haunted by a secret, she's done something bad, and then the finale we get this dramatic reveal where she says, I think I killed someone. We're like, oh my gosh, like she thinks she killed someone, like this is a really big deal. So then we get the massive plot twist at the end of season 1 where she admits that she thought she killed someone, and it is one of the best plot twists in the entire series because it comes out of nowhere. It's not at all what you expect for this kind of show. It takes a surprisingly dark turn, and it adds a layer of complexity to her character around why she ran away. She didn't just run away because she slept with her best friend's boyfriend, as everyone thought. It was also because she thought she killed Pete. And it gives you a whole new perspective also on why she's doing this whole reformed good girl thing. Because she's not just a rich, privileged Manhattan girl. She's aware of this privilege and how it's made her very adrift, and how she's had this whole partying era where she's drunk, she doesn't know what she's doing, and it's led to very real and severe consequences, which is witnessing someone having a drug overdose and not doing anything to help them, and the shame of that around, wow, look at where my mistakes have led me. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be this person anymore, and it's taken me down a really bad path. And again, I love this development for her because it felt important. It was like, wow, this is her really trying to have a fresh start, and low-key you feel bad for her because every time she tries to do something good or charitable or date someone like Dan, who's just down to earth and not as rich as her, everyone's like, nah, you're not going to do that. We know who you really are. You're crazy, Serena, and soon you'll go back to your old ways again. And so they almost demotivate her by reminding her of her past, and it's just frankly not someone she wants to be anymore or resonates with. So she was a very interesting character in season 1, but the interesting thing is that she was only ever good for that one season, and from there it was all downhill for her. She was no longer this interesting, intriguing character, and a lot of people started to dislike her. So what happened? Literally what happened? Let's talk about it. You can't talk about Serena without talking about Blair. Their friendship is one of the core parts of the show, and I personally could never get behind it. I don't like this friendship. Sure, they're iconic and they look sexy together. They look, you know, strong and cool and badass, and the iconic bestie duo. But when you actually look at their characters, it's very cyclical. It's the same mistakes, the same jealousy and resentments and fights, and then they're making up with no real sense of development in their relationship and understanding of each other. It's interesting because the show starts with Blair being jealous of Serena and resenting her because Serena's the most popular rich girl in the Upper East Side. But the show ends with Serena being jealous of Blair because Blair somewhat worked on herself in some ways when she left high school, or at least she did change in some ways, whereas Serena stayed exactly the same. And this is a topic that comes up later, but you end up rooting more for Blair at the end when Serena's being disrespectful towards her in their friendship, but it's not that way in season 1 at all. I mean, the way that Blair was treating her at points in season 1 made me feel really bad. Now, sure, we didn't have a positive introduction to Serena at all, and that's a sign of the kind of person she will always be, which is someone who basically sleeps with her best friend's boyfriend, someone who has no respect and lies to her friend about it. And then when she's called out, she takes no responsibility. She's like, oh, like, why are you mad at me? I don't get it. So yeah, she's inherently a character that is never punished and never takes responsibility. But after that pilot episode, I was like, you know what? A lot of weird shit happens in pilot episodes. Chuck was also a rapist, okay? So I was like, I don't like Serena's behavior in the pilot, but it's just a freaking pilot. Let's get on with our lives. Often they mess up and they make things too extreme, and that never occurs again later in the show. So I forgot about the pilot. I put it aside, right? Because Serena and Blair, as they develop their friendship throughout season 1, I see that Blair is deeply jealous of her and isn't frankly her friend. In fact, a model actually says to Serena before the fashion show, you shouldn't be friends with someone like Blair because you're not allowed to shine too bright out of fear of outshining her. You feel embarrassed to take up too much space. I used to have a friend like that, and it's truly sickening. This is why they never stay your friends, because you realize that they're not happy for you, they're competing for you, and they're not really like vocal, or they hide you in some ways because they don't want you to outshine them, or they're trying to use you. Like, it's very parasitic, and it's not the kind of friendship you want. Like, they don't praise you vocally or really show up for you, but then they're happy to try and use you for your status, your money, your success, something you've got they want. And this is the thing with Serena and Blair, is that although Blair seems very rich and privileged, she doesn't feel like she's anything compared to Serena, because all the boys want Serena. Serena's seen as like the blonde bombshell, effectively. And even though Blair is, by the way, absolutely stunning and looks like an old Hollywood movie star, and her house is beautiful and her mum is very successful, self-made woman, the Van Der Woodsens just have this like systematic wealth that Blair feels like she can't compete with. So yes, she is jealous. And Serena is always so ashamed of making Blair out uncomfortable by sparkling too much, so she always tries to like undersparkle a bit. Blair seems obsessed with Serena, frankly, and obsessed with wanting to have something for herself, which is why she's so insecure at the thought of Serena ever applying to Yale, because she doesn't want a fellow competitor on campus. And that's the thing, Blair is not a girl's girl. She's got a lot of internalized misogyny. As Serena said, which was very well put at this point, because I was still on Serena's side, Serena said, it's not my fault, you're so insecure. And yeah, round of applause. Serena shouldn't have to shrink herself or be all humble in order to make Blair not jealous. That's literally Blair's problem. And for me, as someone that does try to speak positively about themselves and others and tries to not humble themselves, I felt totally on Serena's side here. I was like, Blair's jealous of her. Serena's a misunderstood beauty, you know, like, my views do not stay like that, that's for sure. But anyway, there are signs at the start, like for the photo shoot with Blair's mum. Serena's trying to encourage Blair to get in front of the camera. And it's not Serena's fault they chose her for the photo shoot and they didn't want Blair, but Blair takes all of her rage out on Serena when really the rage should be directed towards her mother. Then we have the fashion week in season 2, and Serena is so scared to walk the runway because she doesn't want to take the attention away from Blair, therefore actively holding herself back from an opportunity to not make Blair feel threatened. Around season 2, the other girls in the friend group are fawning around Serena, saying how great she is, and Blair hates it because she wants to be the center of attention, and she doesn't like that Serena gets it without trying and without having earned it. She also mentions a lot, like when she is doing her interview for Yale, that Serena has this effortless magnetism and playful flirtiness to her, and she's less controlled. So I do think Blair is insecure that she feels more tightly strung and less expressive with her sexuality. Even the fact that she's a virgin and Serena's not, again, ties into perhaps this internalized shame where she wishes she could be as like effortless in a way as her friend. This sense of competition existed way before Nate, may I add. She was always jealous like that. But Serena gets into Columbia Uni in season 4, and Blair is so out of line here because she's again trying to tell Serena where to study. Wait, was this season 4 or season 2? That can't be season 4. I have no idea. It actually doesn't matter. She's jealous, basically. And she's like, no, I don't want you to go to Yale. I don't want you to go here. I don't want you to go to Columbia because I'm here. Like, that's so dumb. Serena should not be making a uni decision based on Blair. That can't be season 4 because it must be season 2. You just can't be making decisions according to what Blair wants. And they have a big fight, and I think she pushes Serena into the fountain, which is just, again, so tacky, so childish. And it annoys me because Blair's got this narrative that Serena didn't work for anything, which isn't true. If either of them is a more hardworking person, in a lot of ways, Serena is very into work too, so you can't compare them. She worked for movie stars, movie directors, congressmen, and she really tried to like get that role and be taken seriously. She actually did actively try to prove herself in those situations too, so I have no idea where Blair got this story from that Serena doesn't try, because she was trying. It's not like she sat around doing nothing for the whole show. I do think in other ways Blair cared for Serena very, very deeply. Like, in season 2, she really stepped up when she had a feeling that Serena was being scammed and lied to by her boyfriend Gabriel, and she was suspicious. She stepped in to protect her even when Serena wasn't listening. And likewise, when Blair was struggling to admit that she loved Chuck in season 2, Serena tried to facilitate that relationship because she knew how important it was to Blair. However, despite those really beautiful moments between the two, I did feel like they would have outgrown each other as friends eventually, and I was kind of happy when Serena decided she didn't want to be friends with Blair anymore in season 6, because it felt like a finally moment where I was like, this was bound to happen at some point. I think that they'd already reached that point where they realized maybe the friendship was toxic and not the healthiest for them around season 2, where they were fighting over going to the same uni, and then Serena tried to sabotage Blair and prove that she could get into Yale, I think just to make Blair jealous and piss her off, even though she didn't even really want to go. She just wanted to prove she could get something Blair had, and then Blair retaliated by bringing up Pete Fairman's death in front of everyone, which was like the worst possible thing she could have brought up, but she used it to weaponize Serena's worst insecurity against her, and it ended and culminated in a physical fight. And that should have been the moment, I believe, where the two of them went, you know what, like, we're bad for each other and like we shouldn't be friends ever again. So that's my view on this friendship, and there's really nothing else to say because I don't find their friendship that interesting, and I believe that it's overrated. But I would say that Blair should have been a vehicle for Serena's development, where she realized like how wrong it is to be a homewrecker, for example. But the problem is that since Serena doesn't get held accountable for anything, this didn't really contribute to like her overall learning at all, because she didn't fully get what she'd done was wrong, or it took her too long to realize that. So now we have Serena's relationships, like the men she dates on the show. We have her relationship with Nate, where he was devastated because he'd obviously lost his virginity to her. It meant something to him, and then she just ran away, which she didn't consider him at all in that. Like, she didn't even call him. To her, it was more of a casual friends with benefits thing, I believe, like a hookup thing, and she didn't really know why she'd done it herself, or I think she would have like called him and let him know where she was going. But by the way, I believe she didn't feel worthy of Nate. She did not feel worthy of his kindness and his devotion to her, because a lot of the time he was quite devoted. I don't think she wanted it. But anyway, she starts dating Dan. She seems way more into Dan, maybe because he's like less rich than her and from a different social class. It felt like just a breath of fresh air, something different, and she felt more grounded in a lot of ways and wanted to escape her old life. I think that explains why she liked him more than Nate. But her romance with Dan in season 1 is incredibly well written. It's sweet, it's wholesome, made me tear up a few times. I was like, oh, these two are so perfect. But it starts to go downhill after that, and they never should have been together again after season 1. I truly believe it should have just been, you know, a sweet teenage romance that never went beyond that. Serena fancies Dan, and she says, I just love the way he looks at me, like no man's ever looked at me in this way before. And this shows me that she liked him because he didn't just sexualize her, he actually wanted to date her. And Serena is very traumatized because she's only ever been seen as a sexual object. She loves this validation because she's sick of being called beautiful. Like, she wants someone to truly see her. And she asks him to explain why he loves her, and he tells her that she's beautiful, smart, sexy as hell, and completely unaware of her effect on him, which I think is a very childish, surface level way to describe love. And it's interesting that 2 of those characteristics he says he loves about her are actually her physical appearance. And the third one is that he likes that she's not too up herself and isn't fully owning her own power as a woman and her own sensuality. I don't know if it's a compliment. Like, it's like a man saying to you, God, I love how self-conscious you are. Like, I love how low your self-esteem is. Like, that's basically what you're saying. Like, I personally don't want to be with a man who humbles me, but like, okay, go off, queen.
I don't know.
Then he finds out her secret, that she thought she killed someone, learns more about her past, and she tries to talk to him about it, but he's not interested anymore. He also doesn't like the lying part, like that she wasn't just upfront, but she was genuinely so ashamed. But he's not interested in like understanding why she was ashamed. He's just like, I'm done with this. And he actually ends things with her, which is interesting. And at her mother's wedding to Bart, they break up for good. And Serena's again in a yellow floral bridesmaid gown, which is significant. I'll go into her wearing yellow later. But she tells him, we're exactly where we were at the Bass brunch. I'm not who you thought I was, and you can't forgive that. Which I think is an excellent point about the inherent problem with this relationship. So I'm gonna hand over to you guys now, because basically my subscriber, Jamie74777 on Reddit, just messaged me privately. We were having a conversation about the show, and he basically sent me a whole thesis about these characters, but I just loved it, so I wanted to share it with you, because he said, I think Nate liked Serena superficially, but doesn't truly love her. She was his ideal woman, the fantasy of his first time, but he never understood her. He was the one who constantly judged her for having slept with a lot of guys before him, for example, and mistrusting her. He was annoyed by everything she was going through and didn't help nor made an effort to understand her. I mean, he literally says to Dan in season 4, Dan, I care a lot about Serena, I always will. But whether she realizes it or not, this is how she pulls people back in, and I'm not going to let it happen anymore. Neither should you. And he fired her in season 5 from The Spectator. I do think he's looking for that Serena essence in a woman, but she is not the love of his life and just a fantasy he needed to get out of his system. He liked Vanessa, and it was a healthy dynamic, but it didn't have much passion. He seemed very into Lola, and she was the stable adult dynamic he was looking for. But I think the woman he cares the most deeply for and will never walk away from is Jenny. I think Nate has a special affection for Jenny that he doesn't have for any of the other girls he dated over the course of the show. He sees her as innocent and special in a way, and that's why he's so let down with her when she goes to the Mean Girls level. Now, I really agree with this point in a lot of ways, because let's put aside the whole creepy age gap for a second, because this is just what the show does. I do believe that he cared for Jenny in a way that he just never did with Serena, and ultimately, if they hadn't ruined Jenny's arc, like when she was older, like if she was in her 20s, I 100% believe once they both matured that she would have gotten with Nate, because the way that their relationship developed to me was very different, because he like really like looked out for her in a way that he just didn't with anyone else. And then my subscriber goes on to say, Serena only truly loved Dan. She tries to fill the void her daddy issues left her with, and only Dan has been able to fulfill it because he made her feel adored and idealized. Not only beautiful, but also smart, and he was nearly obsessing over her, which calmed her anxieties to be loved. He treated her respectfully, and like all the other men in her life, Serena won't choose anyone else as long as there's any hope of her being with Dan. The other men I think she loved, but not to Dan's level, were Ben and Tripp. I know it's gross, but she risked a lot for Tripp, more than any other guy. And Ben seemed to serve as her proto-Dan. I think she saw Nate more as like a friends with benefits type and tried to pretend to herself that she loved him, but deep down she wasn't, because when Dan's available, she goes all in for him. And I think the reason she was struggling between them was because she knew that choosing Dan meant never having Nate as a second choice again. And since the Dan-Serena dynamic is very on and off, if she didn't get with Dan, Nate would also be off the tables. And I don't think her romantic feelings for Nate were deep. In my opinion, she saw him as a rebound or a backup if she couldn't get Dan or any other guy. And I agree in a lot of ways that she really cared about Dan, but the only difference is that I believe it wasn't requited. Like, she was this wounded girl who felt idealized and adored, and she liked how committed he was. But after season 1, he never loves her again in the same way. Like, he's holding on to a memory of it in season 2. The minute he thinks he's in love with Blair, he never respects or treats Serena in the same way ever again, nor does he ever fully proclaim his love for her and say he made a mistake. Like, it seems like after Blair, Serena isn't really on his mind anymore, and I truly believe that he had such a strong fantasy that it was just too disappointing to reconcile the idea of her anymore with the fantasy. And whereas with Blair, he always knew she was bad. Like, from the start, he knew she was a bit of a bad girl, you know, and she was crazy or whatever it was that he thought. He hated her actively. So when he got to know her, it was the real her. He never had any expectations. The bar was down here. Whereas with Serena, the bar was up here. Like, he really thought that she was really great, and he wanted to convince himself and delude himself that her past didn't exist and kind of lie to himself. And I don't think he ever really accepted her fully as a person. And in my opinion, Serena was far more into Dan, because she, no matter what, no matter who she dates, she cannot fully let him go. And also I think that's why she went so crazy when she heard that Dan liked Blair, because she had a sense of ownership over Dan. But also she was very out of touch, because I think as much as she accepted Dan, she sometimes would use his lower economic background to insult him when she was really mad at him. And she knew that she had more resources, more ammunition, and more social power than him. And she would hold it against him and use it against him when needed. Like at school, she can easily assemble a large army to intimidate him, and he couldn't at that time. And she also proved at multiple points that she doesn't understand Dan's world or his background, and she doesn't get his economic disadvantages, how he has to work harder than she does, and how he can't just buy his way into absolutely everything. For example, at school, she would do reckless stuff that could get him expelled, but she would forget that he can't just get out of it like she can. And another thing I want to acknowledge, because that's a problem, because she's not fully getting him, but another problem is that she made him. She literally built his success brick by brick. He met good contacts because of her. His book got published because he wrote it about her and her fascinating world, because he's got nothing really interesting to say about himself. And I don't think we should ever look past that he would not be who he is today without knowing her. Serena says that looking back on it, Nate and Dan were the only two really genuinely good guys she dated, but she didn't see it at the time, which in a lot of ways was true. But Serena does have a tendency, like in her relationships, to really take them for granted. She takes Nate for a ride. She sleeps with him without even wanting a long-term relationship with him. She just did it for funsies. She takes Dan for granted when he's being a good guy in season 1. Like, she runs away a lot, and then it's only until afterwards that she looks back on the relationship and has this newfound appreciation for it. But I will say that although definitely Dan started out as that good guy, that she felt like he was the one that got away, and she felt like maybe she had overlooked him. By the end of the show, he is no longer a good guy. He's a fake nice guy who weaponizes her deepest insecurities against her. And this gets me into my next point, which is pick-me psychology. Why have I been talking so much, as you may have noticed, about Serena's dates and her relationships? Well, this is the freaking problem, because it's all she does. The reason why I haven't mentioned like her career or something is because she has nothing to say about her. Serena, and her biggest downfall is that she is an inherently male-centric and male-oriented character. And her fear of abandonment, her jealousy, her obsession with Dan, her self-harm, her substance abuse, her alcoholism, her running away from reality, her childlikeness, all of these things are dismissed and not explored properly. Like, what do these characteristics mean? This is all trauma we're talking about here. It's not discussed properly. Even the fact that when Dan says like she laughs like a little girl, and they mention a few times that she's kind of childish, or she became an adult too fast, and like there's a lot going on here with her being forced to grow up too fast, and some really serious things with how like she runs away whenever things get difficult, and also like her impulsivity, like the way she randomly just falls in love with a man and becomes limerent and obsessed with them without thinking of the consequences. These are not just like traits, these are genuinely something like concerning that maybe she needed help with, that we could have explored further and looked into. And they're not. But also, Serena will inherently change her personality and interests for a man. Like, if one guy wants something more casual, she'll try and pretend she wants something more casual too. She'll get really upset and bothered if a man doesn't like her, and she spends most of season 3, the whole summer, looking for her dad and trying to contact him while he ignores her. She can't do anything but date and have crushes after season 1. And whenever she makes a comment about wanting like a genuine education, sometimes her mum kind of makes fun of her because she doesn't think she can do it. In season 3, Lily, her mum, is supposedly sick because she's being poisoned by her ex-husband William, who is pretending she's sick when she's not, and he runs away because he doesn't want to be held accountable for his actions. And rather than Serena jumping to her mother's defense, the first thing she says is, no, like, he wouldn't do that. He wouldn't just forget about me, because she so struggles to accept her dad, and she's just in denial. In a similar sense, she just doesn't care about anyone else, and you see that through her relationship with Tripp, who's a married congressman and a lot older than her. You see this true pick-me mentality come to light, where she's like, please choose me, please want me. And she feels this, because of her societal conditioning, I guess, this pressure for him to choose her, and she just completely doesn't care about the consequences it will have on his family. She doesn't care what her friends say on the matter. She doesn't care if her family judges her in the matter. She just wants him, and worst of all, acts as if there's some external force pushing her into it, almost like magic, that she has no control over her own decisions.
Just like that?
You make a good case.
And then she's obsessed with Dan. Just obsessed, and saying how he's the one for her even when he doesn't want her. She says I love you to him in season 5, and he doesn't respond to it or say anything to acknowledge it, because he's secretly still in love with Blair and hoping Blair will reciprocate his feelings. So that's him saying, I'll choose you, but as a backup, I'm hoping Blair will want me. And then he settles for her. She's like a placeholder, because he realized Blair truly loved Chuck and was never going to go for him. But if he could have chosen, he would have chosen Blair. And I really realized this during like my rewatch, that he hated Serena past like season 5. Genuinely looks at her with disgust, with pity, and disinterest. The minute he fell in love with Blair, he never looked at Serena the same way again. And she keeps saying over and over throughout the series, like, Dan is the love of my life. I think he was like my first true love. I'm like, sorry, I'm not buying it. That implies it's requited, which it doesn't seem to be. So again, she just couldn't believe that he would pick Blair over her. So what are actually her insecurities? What are her downfalls? Well, I found an amazing fashion-based article by Kristinda Lynch called The Fantasy of Serena Van Der Woodsen that really summarizes it so well. But basically this article talked about shame. So Serena feeling haunted by like her reckless past, and how she's always looking for a fresh start with Steven, Dan, and Ben. And she keeps running into herself and running into her past, even in season 6. It's just this boring loop of her running away and never learning anything. And the second point this article made is that she is intellectually insecure, because she tells Miss Carr her mother never gifted her a notebook for her writing, but instead a Chanel wallet and a credit card to get her out of the house in season 2, episode 17, which again shows that she is looking for some outer intellectual validation, that she's worthy of study. And you have to wonder if this is why she seeks out artists and writers to date, people who use her as a muse, right? And finally, they pointed out that in the next episode, she harbors a crush on Julian, who's the director of her school's production of The Age of Innocence. And her crush is reflected in her fashion choices, a skinny silver scarf to mimic his, plaid with a black top and grey cardigan. She's trying to be a muse to creative men, to take on their talent instead of nurturing her own. And in the end, Julian barely knows who she is, calling her Sabrina. Come season 5, that name will take on even more significance. And by the way, side note, this doesn't say this in the article, but I'm putting it in. The way she was trying to win over this man who had no interest in her was crazy, because she wanted his validation and approval, but she didn't even like him. She's giggling and flustered and all starry-eyed and flushed and excited. Like, oh my God, he loves me. Julian, he's so smart. And it's abysmal to watch. But also, she doesn't even know him. She just wants the validation to heal this worthiness wound, but she doesn't really like him. And the thing is that this article says, in flashbacks around Mr. Donovan, Serena's ties are still loose, but she wears them with blazers and plaid button-downs, mirroring his. It's almost like she's trying to look like the picture of the perfect prep school student to impress him, to show she wants to do well, because he actually takes her seriously as a student. And not being wanted is a real thing for her. She's used to getting attention for free without trying. So one day, Ben drives Serena to Vassar Library. His car breaks down in the rain. They stop at a bed and breakfast for help, and Serena asks him if they can get a room. And he turns her down, saying, he turns her down, and she says he's the only guy to say no to her. She tells her therapist this. Serena is still terrified of becoming irrelevant. To Gossip Girl, to Ben, but also to Dan, the person who once crafted a whole mythology around her. I so strongly believe this. I believe that she was used to getting attention for free. And that's one of the reasons why she becomes jealous of Blair later in season 5 and 6, is because then she's shocked when she's not getting that dopamine hit of attention. But also, this is just my personal take, I believe that she felt ostracized because she was too rich, too beautiful, and too successful, because it only leaves her with a small social circle of people who kind of get her and get her life, like Blair, for example, to be friends with. It's a small pool of people who actually will feel comfortable around her and not threatened by her success. And as much as she tries to kind of, relate to Ben and act like they're the same, they're not the same, because her mother can land him in prison with a snap of a finger. And in California, this article points out, Serena has a potential new mentor in one of the movies it produces, Jane, and a jealous male supervisor, Marshall. And when Serena finally meets with Jane, she learns that Marshall took credit for the comparison she wrote at the beginning of the summer. Jane asks Marshall to give Serena more responsibility, and so he gives her his entire task list, sure she won't be able to actually finish it that day. She confronts Marshall about this. Obviously, she's upset, and he accuses her of showing him up. He says, I need this job more than you do, okay? I pay for my life. You do one lap around this party, you'll get 10 job offers. You weren't even looking when you found this one. In 2 weeks, when you're at college, will you even look at this as anything more than that one thing you did that summer? So Serena feels guilted and she offers to clear out her desk. This is an example of how she feels inherently like she doesn't really know how she came to deserve this much power, because let's be frank, no one deserves that much money and power when there's people in the world who are struggling and living day to day, and she knows this, and unfortunately it means that people resent her, and even Dan resents her for her success and status, and by the end of season 6 he's competing with her and trying to write a massive book that will publicly call her out and expose her secrets and embarrass her, right?
Wait, what? I didn't read your parts.
The downfall of Serena. This is maybe my most important and final section. People like Serena in season 1 because she's running away from a secret and she's just falling in love with Dan and showing that she's a really genuine, kind person, because she's not judging him for his social status and she just connects with him as a human. Whereas someone like Blair, who's very elitist, would never even glance in Dan's direction. It shows that Serena's compassionate and she kind of treats people the same. Like if she just connects with them, she likes them. And a lot of ways then in season 1, she's quite humble. So you don't see all the cracks in her character that shine through later. But in season 2, Serena, after the breakup, is never the same, and she spends the entire season searching and craving for that sense of love and validation. Dan has abandoned her. She feels judged. Like her mum already judges her and shames her all the time, but now Dan's shaming her and judging her. This is a character with a lot of internalized shame. We even see this through like her actual clothing, because I've seen like a lot of articles that pointed out her clothing choice. Yeah, that same article I told you about says again, unlike Blair or Lily, Serena rarely dresses in what the Upper East Side considers appropriate for an occasion. There's always something slightly off. Her dress is a little too short, her neckline's a little too low, and then there's a blazer thrown on top for decorum. So there's nothing wrong with wearing a short skirt, obviously, but what they're talking about is how the outfit isn't cohesive. So she's in a formal setting, she has a blazer on, but then like the neckline is like all the way down, and often it's not quite appropriate for whatever the event is. And I was thinking about that because I wear that kind of stuff all the time, and I was like, what are they trying to say here then? Like, I don't see any problem with her dressing sexy, but I realized it's because she inherently feels like she's nothing more than just this sexualized blonde figure, and people haven't tried to get to know her, which is why it's so hurtful when even Dan doesn't want to know her. She really sought validation in Aaron and tried to get him to take her seriously and want like an actual committed relationship. Then Gabriel, who was like this older man, so she's seeking to heal her relationship with her father through dating these older men. Same thing with the congressman, with Ben, her teacher, all these older men. She's looking to heal the relationship with her dad by like dating these older men, right? And then she meets Miss Carl, Rachel, and she's seeking approval from her. And that doesn't work. She keeps looking to people for this sense of validation, basically, that she craves. And then she's trying to get into Yale, and she's desperate for them to want her, and she wants them to accept her, and she wants to impress. And again, she's trying to feel like people want her. Then from the girls at school for a while, she's trying to be cool and act like the popular girl and get them to want her. Then she's back onto Dan again, obsessing over Dan because she just needs him to want her, basically. It even happens for a point with Nate. She's constantly looking for that sense of worthiness outside of herself. And then the whole of season 3, she's just basically trying to actually get her dad to talk to her and communicate with her. And then around season 5, 6, it's Steven. She is dating this older man, he's got a daughter, and she is so excited that he would want to propose because it is so inherently validating to know that a man would want to give her a ring and she's the chosen one. You know what I mean? Then I had a question, why didn't Serena go to Brown? Because to me it was quite weird around that season of 2 and 3 where they're talking about going to college, because she'd always had her heart set on it. And then she suddenly wanted to go to Yale and she was like, oh yeah, like this is actually like the one for me and I feel really passionately about this. And I was so confused, like she's dropping her interests left and right. And she chose Columbia with Blair, with Nate. And I do think it's just because the writers wanted them to all be in one location in New York and not be having them on different campuses because they need to be together for the sake of plot, right? And you can't be having them speaking on the phone. Like you need them all at the same university. But what's interesting is she has a whole identity crisis, like for a lot, where she's like searching for meaning and she keeps saying like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Maybe I'm going to drop out of uni. Like, should I even go to uni? And she's entirely aimless for like a lot of the show. And even when she's in Columbia, rather than actually working hard, she's more focused on getting her, again, older professor, I think Colin, to want her. And she's spending a lot of the time like obsessing over him and talking about him rather than focusing on her work.
Do I sense a little mystery there?
They are very out of touch people. I think that's part of the point of the show, is that for her, like there are no consequences. So she can drift from uni to uni and have a messed up resume and big gaps in her CV, and it genuinely like will not affect her because she's a Van Der Woodsen. But like after a while, this was really insufferable to watch for me. And it got really infuriating and annoying with her constantly saying, I have no idea who I am and I need to go find myself. Because to me, that's the entire point of university, is you go to uni and you find yourself. You take courses, you learn which courses you like, which you don't like. But she thinks that just floundering around will give her that sense of clarity that she's looking for. And she seems to like think she's special in a way. And I did find that really annoying because it just reflects her privilege, right? But then again, we have season 4 where she meets this girl, Charlie, who's an imposter pretending to be a relative and lying. But Serena sees herself in Charlie because apparently Charlie is struggling with her mental health and is suicidal, and Serena tries to save her. And to me, it made me really sad because Serena's own trauma and mental health problems in the past have been like used against her, her own history with her brother, right? And Ivy/Charlie is manipulating her mental health as a tool to gain sympathy, which to me showed how Serena's vulnerabilities have been exploited by people in her life, including her own father, William, right? Who sees that she's kind of like a lost puppy. But when Charlie's about to pretend to jump from a window, Serena stops her and says, being me doesn't mean what you think it means. All night I've realized I didn't choose college. I never chose between Dan and Nate. I didn't even choose Paris last year. And this to me signified that Serena has no idea who she is and she's just drifting through life. You know what I mean? And it kind of links into what her mum said to her about how she doesn't have boyfriends, she has life rafts, because she's just trying not to drown and looking to men to give herself a sense of excitement, meaning. Like, let's be real, when you have a crush, life is so fun. Like sometimes it's what motivates you to go to class. It's like, there's a cute boy in class, like, you know, you can kind of romanticize the interaction in your head to like have a reason to go. It just makes life more easy to cope with. But I think Serena does that to an extreme. And this is part of the downfall of her character. And she's never the same again. Even in season 1, she had a whole very strongly developed relationship with her brother and backing him and protecting him that is not touched on in the later seasons. And she has no experience, doesn't even do uni properly, and she just gets randomly a PR job, no degree. And her naivety makes me laugh because she genuinely thinks they hired her because they like her and they believe in her. She doesn't know she's an Nepo baby. Like, she actually thinks it was because of her. She's so out of touch. It's crazy. And she sabotages Chuck because he got upset with her after she ruined a very important business meeting for him when he was obviously gracious enough and hospitable enough to let her stay at his place. And then she gets really drunk and she says, I don't know what I want. That's why I don't want to go to university and basically stay here to decide what I want. So she rejects Yale, she rejects Brown, and she just thinks that she can reject this college level education, which is something her mum had also like encouraged her to get, which again, it's disrespectful, it's lame, it's bratty, but again, it shows that when you can get anything, nothing means anything anymore. You know what I mean? And she, again, when she does these things, the problem is that she's not held accountable for the repercussions of these actions. And like, they sabotage Dan in the same way, because in season 1, Dan really cares for his family, but at the end of the show, he's just wanting to do whatever it takes to get in on high society, which is odd because that never seemed to be a primary goal for him in season 1. Like, he seemed to just genuinely want Serena. And in season 1, Serena was about self-improvement. She was like, I actually want to study for my SATs. I want to show up in time for class. I'm not skipping school anymore. And by the final season, she's lost and has no purpose. She's not driven. And she's just looking for men to validate her. And in season 5 and 6, when her and Dan get back together, it is incredibly rushed with not enough build-up. And in season 5 and 6, that's when she officially becomes a nasty bad person and a bad character who will do anything to get the spotlight past the point of no return. Her entitlement and her selfishness is off the charts. So she's jealous of Blair. She doesn't respond well when Dan and Blair start dating, even though she did the same thing but worse. She is Gossip Girl. She becomes Gossip Girl for a while in season 5 for attention, attractive. And in season 5 and 6, she is pissed at Blair for liking Dan. And even though she's living with Blair, she at one point bumps into her in the bathroom and gives her this nasty bitchy look. And I was like, bitch, you're living in her house. Like, shut the fuck up. And then she becomes even more jealous of Blair in season 5, episode 24, How the Tables Have Turned. And she says, I'm only alone because of you. You can't have Chuck and then have your prince too and then take Dan on top of that. Blair says, you can't take anyone. That's not how relationships work. And you would know that if you'd grown up at all since high school. And I was shocked about this because in this scene, Serena should have been apologizing for reading Blair's diary. But she's not apologizing for that. She's become a full-on mean girl. She intentionally tries to ruin Dan and Blair. And then she basically manipulates Dan into pretending she's gotten something on her dress so she can take off her clothes and then have sex with him. And then she audio records them having sex so she can use it, which is, again, a sex tape he didn't consent to, which is unbelievable. And I think he put it well, though, which is that even though he's cheated in a sense, he was trying to escape his pain because he thought Blair didn't love him. Whereas Serena wasn't doing it to escape her pain like Dan was. She was doing it because she wanted to destroy Blair and ruin her happiness and crush her. So now at the end of season 5, she slept with Blair's boyfriend, again, like she did with Nate. But now she's recorded him, audio recorded him without his consent. And then at the end of this, she doesn't take responsibility and she victimizes herself and pretends that she's the one that deserves an apology. Then in season 6, she runs away again because she can't take responsibility and she starts dating this random guy called Steven. And she's again kind of transformed and morphed her personality into the kind of woman she thinks Steven will want. She even starts dressing differently. She thinks he's cheating and she calls the girl a slut. And she doesn't want him to know about her past. She just wants the validation. And then she drops it again. And then she starts, wanting Dan. She starts dating him, whatever. And he finally publishes this article or part of his book. No, it's the chapter from the book. Golden Girl Falls from Grace, a faux love story. So it's interesting he calls her Golden Girl because if you look at any season of the show, as I mentioned, Serena's wearing gold and yellow all the time, especially when important things happen. She's often wearing a gold or yellow dress because it's symbolic of her status, sunshine, but also when you're the Golden Girl, you can fall from grace, right? And he's written a good chapter about her and a bad chapter. The bad chapter about Serena says, Serena is nothing. She's a golden shell. Give her love and she'll do anything you want. With daddy issues like these, it's not hard to push the right buttons. And once you do, the most powerful girl on the Upper East Side has no power at all. So he inherently didn't like that she was powerful and wanted to disempower her, which is quite awful actually, that he would speak this way about someone he supposedly had all this love for and truly knew and understood, and he made her out to be shallow and flighty and fake, even though he got to know her and realized that's just her public persona that the media presents, and she's not really like that. And in season 6, episode 8, he literally gaslights her. So he releases this awful article about her in the bad chapter, but it turns out he orchestrated and planned this entire thing to get her back, including the elevator breaking. Like, he orchestrated that too. And that means he planned way in advance to a sociopathic extent, and yet she still looks past that and gets back with him, even after finding out that he was Gossip Girl, which is the ultimate male-centered character decision. Is, you've screwed me over, you've been lying to me for years about being Gossip Girl and humiliating me publicly for years, but it's okay, I'm gonna forgive you. And she twists it into saying that actually it's a love story to all of them, and it's quite flattering, really. It makes sense because in a way she wants to believe that she's so important, that she was his muse. And it's quite flattering to think that, even though what he said was mean, that she meant that much to him, that he was like writing all this stuff about her. So I think it just directly feeds into her ego again. And 5 years later, they get married, and she has again a gold wedding gown. I guess because she really is nothing to him but a golden shell. And the saddest thing is that in itself is ultimately a tragedy, that she would end up with someone who would debase her like that. But the worst part is no one sees it. No one sees it because all the reviewers and commenters and, you know, see someone beautiful and fun and rich and successful, and they're jealous. They want to bring her down, and they will look for anything bad she does to basically say that she's the spawn of Satan, without seeing the inherent tragedy of this character. Like when you look at Alison De Laurentiis from Pretty Little Liars, when you trace it back and you peel back the layers, you realize she had a really tragic home life that made her the kind of person that she is, in a very like cold home environment with a dad who was a literal sociopath. And the thing is with Serena is they just use her as a vessel for her male love interests and to date. And they don't try and make her a likable character. They just make her more and more awful and selfish. What's interesting is there's a novel by Scott Fitzgerald called The Beautiful and the Damned, which is about the decline and disillusionment of Anthony and his wife Gloria as they navigate love, ambition, and the destructive lure of wealth and status in Jazz Age America. And Serena decides to stay with Cece in California for the summer. She says, I needed to make a choice and I choose me, to Blair. And so she's on the beach and, you know, she comes across a man reading her favorite book, which is Scott Fitzgerald's The Beautiful and the Damned. And she says, I relate to it more than I should admit. And it becomes a whole thing of them saying, oh my God, come work with us in this movie then about The Beautiful and the Damned. And she gets really into it. It's interesting that she's so passionate in saying she relates to the characters, because it reflects her own inner conflict about being consumed by the glamorous and yet shallow and meaningless world of the Upper East Side. And Gloria is a woman defined by her beauty and charm, but much like Serena, this beauty becomes her cage because it's all people see her for. And I also think it's interesting that around this time she said to Blair, I choose me, because the whole problem with Gloria's character and The Beautiful and the Damned and all these characters really is they don't choose themselves and they self-destruct. So this shows me that ultimately this is like pretty privilege gone wrong. Like, this is a very beautiful but thoroughly lost and wounded young woman who has been sexualized, who didn't earn anything she got in her life and kind of knows that and feels like a bit of imposter syndrome. She was abandoned. She didn't have her dad growing up, which has given her like massive problems, because she knows she has that sense of like male power over her, because what her dad ultimately did was disempower her by leaving. So it's made her in a way like seek men's approval. But the sad thing is that she also didn't have her mum, because her mum was just social climbing, marrying different men. And then when Serena finally finds a guy she actually likes, which is Dan, she feels like she can't date him, or it's weird because Lily had kind of gotten there first and dated Dan's dad, and Serena doesn't want to be like Dan's step sibling, and she doesn't want, like, that would be so embarrassing for her as well. So she just feels like she's not been raised by her mum. Like, she didn't really grow up with a really present mum which her mum basically says and apologizes for, is that she did like miss a lot of Serena growing up. And then even though Serena's mum made her the way she is, her mum then blames her and threatens to send her off to boarding school or reformatory school rather than having any kind of sympathy for her. And Serena spends much of the show therefore searching for this sense of passion to earn something for herself, like be respected in her career. And I don't think she ever found that sense of meaning she was looking for. I'm not convinced she found it unless marrying Dan is meant to count as the happy ending that she always wanted. And I don't think it does. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you for the next video.